This video is on modular functions and interpreting graphs. So in this diagram, I've got three functions, f of x, g of x, and h of x. F of x and g of x are modular functions, and h of x is just a line. Take a moment to see, can you work out the function for each of these, f of x, g of x, and h of x? Pause the video, and when you've that done, then play and see if you're correct. So f of x is the absolute value of x, or you could say the absolute value of 1x plus 0 if you liked. G of x can be written as the absolute value of 2x minus 2. There is an alternative version that you may have written down for this. You may have said the absolute value of minus 2x plus 2, which is also correct. And h of x is just equal to 3. Don't forget, horizontal lines are just equal to the value they pass through on the y-axis. So we're looking at interpreting our graph. So our question is going to be about using the graph to estimate our answers. Note that the instruction is to use the graph. That means we don't want to work the answers out algebraically, we want to do them visually. So first we want to estimate the values of x where f of x equals g of x. So what does this mean? Well, it means that we want to look where f of x and g of x intersect, and then drop to the x-axis and see what x values we read at those points. With questions like these, I will be allowed a little bit of leeway. Just be careful to answer as accurately as you possibly can. In my diagram, it looks like x equals 0.6 and x equals 2. Next, I'm asked to estimate the range of values of x where g of x is less than f of x. If I'm ever asked to find a range of values, it's quite likely that I'll have to use inequalities in my answer. In this context, being told that g of x is less than f of x means that I'm looking at the graph to see where g of x is below f of x. So looking at my diagram, f of x is in pink and g of x is in purple. And I can see here that as f of x continues up in this line, that g of x is clearly below it between the two red dots. I want to use the x values that I would drop down to on the x-axis to frame my answer. And g of x is below f of x between these 2 points, so between these two x values. Now these happen to be the x values that I got as my answer in part 1. And I can see that this is occurring to the right of x equals 0.6 and to the left of x equals 2. So for my answer, I give x is greater than 0.6, x is less than 2, or if you wish, you can write it as x is between 0.6 and 2. Okay, next I want to find or to estimate the range of values of x where f of x is greater than h of x. Notice the use of the word range in the question again, implying that I'll have an inequality in my answer. I want f of x to be greater than h of x, and visually greater than means above. So I want to look at my diagram and see where f of x, the pink function, is above h of x, the red function. I'll begin by looking at where they intersect. So I've marked their points of intersection. I read the x values involved, which are clearly minus 3 and 3 on the x-axis. And I can see in my diagram that f of x, the pink function, is above the red function h of x to the left of this region and to the right in this region. So I'm going to use less than minus 3 and greater than 3 as my two solutions in this case. In this case, there's two separate regions in which the pink function is above the red function. This part here and this part here. And since they're two separate regions, I don't run them together as one answer. I keep them as two separate answers. For our final example, let's estimate the range of values of x where f of x is less than g of x is less than h of x. Okay, first of all, we need to interpret what this means. Well, as before, range just tells me to use inequalities in my answers. But the bit of this question that stands out is the statement here, f of x less than g of x less than h of x. An easier way to look at this would be to think of it as being g of x as being between these two functions. So g of x is greater than f of x and less than h of x. So visually, where is the purple function above the pink function and below the red function? So I've highlighted the two regions of the graph where this applies. And I can see in each case that they're between 2 points. So this green section here is between this point and this point. And this green section here is between this point and this point. So I must identify the x values to go with each of those points to begin with. And so I can see that I have an estimate now for those 4 x values. minus 0.5, 0.6, 2 and 2.5. This first highlighted green region is after minus 0.5 and before 0.6. So I'll write it as x is between minus 0.5 and 0.6. And the second green region is from 2 on as far as 2.5. So in that case, I can write it as x being between 2 and 2.5. Remember that because you're being asked to estimate the values, you will be given a little bit of leeway, but still be as careful and as accurate as you possibly can from your graph.